Interesting reaction there. Now joining us to share his reactions to the midterm polls is Matt Driskill. He's executive editor for Foreign News with Singapore's Today newspaper. Matt, it's great to have you with us as always. Let's talk first about the Republicans and their claim that sort of a gridlock will sort of pave the way or reduce sort of or give them more power in the House. But how is that going to work if the president is a Democrat?
Well, the claims that they will reduce gridlock and they will pass more legislation and all of that, that's sort of a red herring. Whoever retains control of the Senate, whether it's Republicans or the Democrats, they will have the thinnest of majorities. And if you keep in mind the Senate, that august institution of freedom and democracy, they have some of the weirdest, most arcane rules in the world, and whoever's in the minority can bottle up legislation forever. So a lot of these things that they say, well, we're going to pass all this legislation, the Democrats can come in, they can filibuster, they can do all sorts of things, they can put a hold on certain legislation, and you won't know who put a hold on it. And so I think that the gridlock probably will continue.
Have we even forgotten last year's fiasco with a government shutdown? I mean, I feel like they say that if they gain control, that the gridlock will be over and they'll be able to pass more legislation. But wasn't the fiasco from last year still resonating in voters' minds?
Well, remember, this is also when the sequestration, it is too early for me to say that word, but that's when they were trying to come up with all these budget moves, and they were trying to figure out the budget, and Democrats were wanting to cut the budget, Republicans were saying, no, we have to cut taxes in order to balance the budget cuts, and so they came out with the sequestration. Thank you. But the problem is, yeah, Americans have very short-term memories when it comes to those things. I don't really think that the budget and those budget cuts and the gridlock and all that, I read the press all the time. I'm in the press, and I don't really see that. I don't remember seeing that become an issue in the campaign.
Because the Republicans bore the brunt of that.
The Republicans bore the brunt of that, but again, Americans have very short memories when it comes to those kinds of things. You're talking about the people that are in power now are sort of the MTV generation, and they remember things for about 5 minutes, and then ooh, a new shiny Apple gadget, and they're off thinking about something else. So, those kinds of things didn't really, it was just on the surface and nobody really thought that much about it.
When you talk about short-term memory, very recently, President Obama's approval rating seemed to be sort of at an all-time low. And the Republicans are claiming that this is a midterm referendum on his performance. How do you think it's going to play out then for the next 2 years? Because he's still going to be in power.
I think, yeah, if I was Obama, I think it's going to play out very well for him. I think his golf game is going to improve tremendously. He's going to get a lot of time on the greens, it's going to be tough for him. I think a lot of people are disappointed in Obama. He came to office with great fanfare, with great promise, with great hope, and a lot of that has fallen by the wayside, and people are very disappointed.
Did they see that as his failing or the failing of those sort of around him, like even Congress itself?
Whether or not it's his, if you could fairly say that it's his failing, or whether you could unfairly say it is, people are saying it is his fault. When you're the president, you get blamed for everything, good or bad. And you don't get the credit for anything good, and you get blamed for everything bad.
Speaking of credit, I think it's unfair because people are pointing to the economy, how it isn't recovering as fast as it should, but it's done pretty well. The earnings season's just about to wrap up. It hasn't been bad. Stocks are doing pretty well.
Listen to me. Yes, you can say that. The economy's doing great.
Jobs reports are good.
Well, they're not that good. And if you look at it on a net basis, if I'm not incorrect, I believe I'm right on this, the jobless figures, the employment levels are way below where they were in 2008. Even though they may be slowly coming up, on a net basis, you look at where they were compared to before the financial crisis, a lot of people are still out of work. And that's the problem. The companies might be doing well because they slashed all the workers, so of course they're doing better. Stock market's doing okay because we bailed out all the investment banks. We privatized the debt. We made the debt public and privatized the profit. So the banks are doing great. The companies are doing great. People that are getting hurt are the people on the street. There are no jobs. Housing figures still aren't where they should be, even though they're coming back up. But again, people don't have jobs. And when you don't have a job, you don't spend money.
I think that's indicative, though, of a global trend as opposed to just only for the U.S.
Well, but we're talking about the U.S. today. So.
Yeah, U.S. elections,
Well,
yes.
and keeping the focus on the U.S. elections, President Obama's in his second term, so we'll have a new American president in 2 years' time. Regardless, is this midterm referendum, is it seen as like a jockeying for positions to seeing who's going to sort of move and get themselves all primed and ready?
It's already happening,
absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
You've been seeing it.
And this is what people need to really understand in terms of what's going to be happening in the next 2 years. The election campaign for 2016 president starts tomorrow. Mm-hmm. After the election is over, once they call it, midnight Tuesday in the U.S. time, that's when people start lining up. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Rick Perry,
the Clintons,
the Hillary Clinton. Although she's gonna play it cagey for a while, but still, people need to understand the U.S. presidential election for 2016 starts tomorrow, and that's when they've got to line up money, they've got to declare, they've got to get going.
Well, do you think whatever happens later today, as well as tomorrow's campaigning for the future presidential election, do you think that'll affect Asia in any way?
Not so much. A lot of people have said, well, what about the Trans-Pacific Partnership? Republicans might be in control, and they are historically pro-business. Problem is, Republicans are more anti-Obama than they are pro-business. And any Republican who even is thinking about running for president, there's no way he's going to hand Obama a victory before 2016 because the election starts tomorrow. The campaign season starts. So, and keep in mind, too, on TPP, for example, it was the Democrats who actually held up the fast-track approval because they're worried about shipping jobs overseas. So even if the Republicans do come in and say, oh, Mr. President, here, we're going to give you fast-track approval, the Democrats are going to say, hold on.
And they'll employ their tactics.
And they will then delay, they will filibuster, they will do whatever it takes. And so, TPP, doubtful.
What then about Obama's pivot to Asia then?
What has been the pivot to Asia so far?
It's been sort of almost half-hearted. There's been always distractions.
He put some Marines, a couple of thousand Marines in Australia where they're drinking beer and being very polite.
Well, they've just signed up with the Philippines,
according to reports.
The defense pact.
The defense pact.
Defense pact with the Philippines, fine. But you don't see this whole, and again, it's all military. All right. So we've got defense forces in Manila. We've got, what about diplomacy? 30 some odd ambassadorships are still unfilled because Republicans have put a hold on the nominees. Now, do you think that they're suddenly going to come in and say, oh, we're in power now, Mr. Obama, let's fill all these ambassadorships? Where's the diplomacy? A pivot to Asia cannot just be military. If you're going to engage with the region, you've got to engage diplomatically. You've got to engage on the ground with Peace Corps, all of those things. So the pivot to Asia has been sort of half-hearted in my
It has been half-hearted.
There's IS, there's Ebola, a lot of big issues that have kind of taken it away. Do you think it would be fair to say that he hasn't tried to boost relations here?
No, I think he's tried, but again, I think it's half-hearted. And keep in mind, too, for the administration and for, I would venture to say, most of America, Asia is China. They don't really think about Southeast Asia so much. Business people do, because they've got car factories or shoe factories in Indonesia or Vietnam or Taiwan. They've got chip plants in some of those same places. So business people do, but on the diplomatic front or on the political front, most of the time you ask congressmen, you ask other people, they think, oh, Asia, we need to worry about China, and that's it, because China's, the 800-pound, and excuse me, China, for saying this, but it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room that you can't ignore. And so, the other countries, they're kind of small, not so much. They got to worry about China, militarily, of course, and then also financially. China's got $4 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds.
So does it mean anything then if the Republicans to win in the Senate and the House is a positive or negative effect to Asia, or you think the status quo will continue?
Is it really that big of a deal?
No, on the one, I think the smart money would be if I'm a businessman in Asia or something like that, I would start placing my bets on whoever's going to be the next president, whether it's Hillary Clinton or whichever Republican comes up. But again, I think what you're going to see is the Republican, there'll be a lot of rhetoric. We need to be tougher on China. You know, we need to support Taiwan. You might see the Republicans come up and say,
you know,
okay.
that said, though, with the Republicans not really winning in the last election, it was that close with Mitt Romney and Obama. Do you think voters can get behind a Republican candidate? There's been a lot of criticism of, you know, how the Republican Party has been attracting votes.
Well, yeah, the party is, you know,
Has its own issues,
It has
right?
its own issues with women. Some of the
Immigration.
Some of the Republicans have come out and said some things that are just out of this. I wonder what color the sky is on their planet. Some of the things they've said. So they've had a hard time. But it depends on the candidate they attract. If Jeb Bush decides to run, and his mother said he was the one who should have been president, but if Jeb Bush decides to run, but it's true.
Okay.
Then, you know, that could be a really interesting horse race between him and Hillary.
That will be interesting.
We'll
Okay.
have to watch this space. Thanks so much for coming in and speaking with us, Matt. Matt Driskill, executive editor, Foreign News, with the Today newspaper, sharing his thoughts on these midterm elections. Now, still ahead here on First Look Asia.